Hey everyone, this is Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this case I'm going to be talking about why Glocks are better than 1911s and basically better than everything else out there in the market. And this is a kind of topic that never ends. It's the eternal debate, which gun is best and such. And this was recently brought up in my website, The Modern Survivalist, by a reader. He expressed his opinion as well, very passionately about why 1911s are better and such. It could go forever. Now, at the end of the day, sometimes people just want to know what's best, what works best, and they just want to stick to that. And I can completely understand that. Actually, I got an email yesterday asking such a question. And I think it's important because at the end of the day, we have limited amount of time, limited amount of money. And, you don't want to waste either one of those. And, as a firearms enthusiast, a bit of a gun nerd, if you want to put it that way, I've spent thousands of both, thousands of bucks, thousands of hours, because I really enjoy firearms, and that's my thing. I was one of the, I became a licensed firearms collector by a very early age, 22, 23 years old, and anyone in Argentina knows that getting a RENAR collector's license is not the easiest thing there is. It's very uncommon actually, but I did that. I really like guns, and in this journey of trying different stuff, I learned a thing or two, and I tend to differentiate between what it is that you buy and collect and what is practical and useful. So this is directed specifically for you guys looking for practical and useful. You don't want to waste, you don't want to waste hundreds or thousands of hours of your life learning Colt revolvers and understanding how precious and wonderful the mechanism is on a Colt Detective or whatever. You just want something that works and gets the job done and performs the best. I'll say first of all that I started shooting. My first real handgun, which I learned on, was a 1911. I was about 14 years old. I convinced my old man of buying a Norinco 1911. I had done all my research. I knew that a 1911 was the best gun in the world, and that's what we ended up buying. I started shooting with that. I learned to shoot with a 1911. Got good at it. Became second nature to use that gun, and I completely agree with that saying that says, beware of the man with only one gun because he probably knows how to use it. That was our gun in my house at a very early age when we went shooting. That was the gun that we had. Later on, as I grew older and such, that's the gun I took to classes as well. Learned to shoot it very well. Was extremely reliable. That Norinco 1911 is, to this day, it's very, very reliable. And it was very reliable with 45 ACP, full metal jacket, round nose ammunition. The more you get away from that round nose shape, which the 1911 is designed for, the more things start getting shaky and less reliable. Later on, I started customizing my 1911 so as to make it an even better gun, and managed to make it unreliable, spending a few thousands of bucks with expensive, fancy parts to upgrade it and whatnot. Well, one of the first things you learn is that a 1911 Colt or any other brand is a hand-fitted gun. Every part fits specifically in that gun. If you just go to a gun shop and buy parts, you're not going to be just dropping into place. You have to file them, carefully sand them so as to fit precisely. And that's when things start getting a little bit trickier. In general, you could say a more simplified version of the 1911 gunsmith is that the more accuracy you want, the more you have to reduce the tolerances, but in doing so you reduce the reliability of the gun. That's why some of the 1911s that are very accurate, they're not as reliable. So it's about finding that balance in between the two. So now I had my customized 1911, which I had spent thousands of bucks into, and it was not as reliable as it had been straight out of the box. That's the story of everyone that went through down that path. Just the lesson there is, don't touch your 1911. If it works well, don't mess with it. Leave it as it is, because you're going to be messing it up. A few thousand bucks later, and several trips to different gunsmiths, nicer, cool-looking finishes and such, I ended up with my customized 1911 that looks cool, had all the cool parts in it, was maybe a quarter of an inch more accurate, grouped a quarter of an inch smaller at 25 yards, and was finally again reliable if using the proper ammunition, which is Full Metal Jacket 45 ACP hardball, or as close to it as possible. And that's when I started taking more classes. Guys, you have to understand that, especially in Argentina, the 1911 45 ACP is a huge deal. People think that Americans are crazy about 1911s. In Argentina, it's even more of a thing. That's because when back in the day, right after the 1911 was created, the Argentine government got very much interested in it. They bought thousands of Colt 1911s. They ended up striking a deal with Colt. Colt ended up bringing machinery to Argentina, to the military factory over there, and not only the machinery, they started training people in Argentina. Colt engineers and workers trained the Argentine workers so as to use those machineries in the military factory, started making their own 1911s. That's how they ended up with the Sistema 1927, which is an exact copy of the Colt 1911. It's a gun that is highly sought after in the 1911 collector's market. A nice looking Sistema 1927, 11.25 millimeters, which is exactly the same as 45 ACP, except for, of course, it's in millimeters instead of inches. But there's a very big history in Argentina around the 1911 model and the 45 ACP. Argentina used the 1911 45 in both all their armed forces branches, in all law enforcement departments, in every province, and in federal level as well. It was all 1911 45 ACP. Later on, they ended up changing that for the Browning high power 9mm. Very eclectic taste in firearms, the Argentine government. All very much appreciating of the John Moses Browning designs. And it would be like interesting stories if you talk to some of those old timers, especially the ones that had served using, especially the older cops that had used the 45, and later on they had used the 9mm. They would all complain about, oh, the 45, it's so much more effective at stopping bad guys than 9mm, especially because in Argentina, because of the laws, even now they cannot use, police departments cannot use hollow points. They have to use just a round nose, Full Metal Jacket. And in that case, in general, talking to these guys, you would see that most of them would agree that 45 was more effective at stopping than 9mm. But going back to my original story, started shooting with my nice 1911, started taking the classes and doing okay with those. But as soon as you start taking more serious training, you start noticing more things. That's why it's so important to actually go to the classes. If you've never taken a class before, don't think that you know everything. Just be humble, go to the beginners defensive pistol shooting class, then intermediate, then advanced. That's the steps you should be taking, and little by little you start learning stuff. The first thing I noticed was that, of course, I ran out of ammunition much sooner than everyone else using Glock pistols or some of the other high capacity 9mm. And of course, I had a 7-round mag, and the rest of the guys had Glock 17s with 17 rounds in there. Of course, you run out of ammunition sooner. Then, as the classes started getting a little bit more intense, and a little bit more demanding, you start noticing the shortcomings of the 1911 design. It's a great gun. It was especially a great gun within its era. Even 50 years after that, it was still king of the hill. The 1911, compared to everything else out there, there just wasn't anything that compared to it. Now, in spite of his genius, John Moses Browning was still working with whatever it is that he had. There's a limitation to what he could do. He had to work with, parts that had a certain amount of tolerance, which is nothing like what's available today in the modern industry. That's something that people fail to understand. You just cannot compare a 1911 with a Glock pistol or any of the modern pistols that you have these days. In terms of reliability in the classes, you quickly started to notice that the guys bringing 1911s, that they would be like Colts or some customized sistemas and such, they started having problems. It's unavoidable. 1911s in classes where you end up shooting 800 rounds in a couple of days or something along those lines, they start having issues, especially when you start dropping the gun in the grass, mud and such. It just cannot be avoided. The 1911 is nowhere near as rugged to abuse and resistant to abuse as the Glock pistol. There really is no comparison between the two. As good as the 1911 is compared to guns of its time and even a little bit beyond that, that's fantastic. But compared to the Glock just blows it out of it. There's no comparison whatsoever. Besides that, I also noticed a few more things. In my custom 1911, I had good sights, but the standard sights that some of the guys had in their older 1911s were very small. That's an easy fix. But then you have problems like how fast you're reloading with it. The single stack 1911, when reloading, you have to fit it into a smaller hole. With a double stack magazine of the Glock pistol, you just reload faster and quicker. And you could say, yes, you could add a magazine well so as to slam it into place faster and more reliably. Yeah, but you start out adding stuff to your 1911. You start converting your 1911 into a race gun. And those are things that already come within the Glock design itself. You have the big mag well that's like a huge hole, and the narrow magazine tip slams into place much faster. That already is part of the Glock design. While on the other hand, it has to be added and changed in the 1911. More things. Yeah, for me it was second nature to just, well, not even second nature, it was first nature to disengage the safety of the 1911 when drawing. But for people that haven't spent years doing that, it is one more thing that can go wrong, especially for those that are new shooters and are thinking of what it is they should get. You have the safety. You have to make it not second nature but first nature to disengage it when drawing. That takes not months, it takes years until you reach a level where it's not an issue anymore. And it's still going to be a part that could go wrong during a fight, during the stressful encounter that is close quarter battles. That's in those cases where everything goes wrong, every part, every safety, every possible thing that could get messed up, it's a potential problem. It's best not to have it entirely. And one more thing that I noticed, my 1911 was not melted or dehorned. It had a treatment of some kind, but still, the 1911 is still sharper and not as ergonomic as the Glock pistol. After a 10-hour class of shooting, your hands would show cuts in different places because of the sharp edges that the 1911 still has. The Glock pistol is much more ergonomic, so finally I made up my mind and went with the Glock pistol. And all of these things turn out to be just what I'm saying. They just turn out to be true. For months, yeah, even years, I would try to disengage the safety of in the Glock that just wasn't there, no problem. You just flip the finger on the side of the Glock. There's nothing there, so that wasn't an issue. But I quickly learned to appreciate all the advantages it has. Now, some of the points people, the die-hard fans of 1911s will make, and again, guys very sentimentally attached to their guns, will say that the angle of the 1911 is so much better than the angle and the grip of the Glock pistol. That's complete BS, or yeah, it's full of bullshit. The Glock pistol points so much better than the 1911. It's not only because of the grip. Another common thing that people will say is, oh, the Glock pistol feels like grabbing a 2x4. It's awful. Your hand naturally forms a square-shaped grip. So it's really not true that the 1911 is more ergonomically correct than a Glock pistol. That simply is not true. Even, especially these days with Gen 4 Glocks, which are even a little bit smaller, the Gen Glock, the Gen 4 Glock is actually not that different from a Browning high power. Browning, the guy that made the 1911, his last most developed pistol was the Browning high power. Even though Gideon Saif, the guy that did the FAL rifle, finished the high power design, it is still very much a Browning pistol, the 9mm high power. And if you put those two side by side, the grip shape of the Glock and the grip shape of the high power, it's really not that different. It's actually very, very similar. So Browning obviously considered that an improvement, an advance, an evolution of the 1911. Then there's the point of that the 1911 is used in IDPA and action shooting. Well, those are race guns, and race guns have nothing to do with the gun that you need for self-defense or for fighting or for combat. It's apples and oranges, completely different. You couldn't even carry in a holster, in a normal holster, a race gun. It has to be fitted into a special holster. The thing is huge. It's intended for a sport. It's not intended for combat use. So it's not you're not going to be winning any argument in terms of 1911s being better for defensive shooting because they are better for action shooting sports. It's like thinking that a 22 pistol is good for fighting because it's good for target shooting. It's that kind of comparison. It really has nothing to do one thing with the other. Then there's the matter of magazines being so flimsy. The 1911 magazine, I think it's one of the weakest point it has. The gun, maybe one of the weakest point it has is indeed that. It's an old gun. I know that it's used even today. It's used by some groups. I think the Marines have the Special Forces, the Special Operations Command of the Marines. They have the M45 CQB pistol and such. But it's a dying. It's a design that, even though it's still great and highly sought after and such, it's not nearly as popular as it used to be 10, 20 years ago. That's because these things have their time, and the 1911 has gone way beyond what anyone would have expected, and it just makes a statement of how great of a gun it was. Maybe one of the other things that why people are so sentimentally attached to the 1911 is because when you look at some of the pistol legends in the shooting world, like Jeff Cooper and such, these are guys, Mr. 45, guys that have a close relationship with the 1911. But also realize that these guys have a certain age. Many of them are not even around anymore. That's why these guys are so attached to the 1911, because for most of their lives, by the time these guys were 50, 60 years old, the 1911 was still the best thing they could shoot. So understandably so, they are so attached to it. Maybe in the same way that 30 years from now, those of us of our generation, or at least of my generation, will still be attached to the Glock pistol. And honestly, I'm not going to be changing my view of it until there's something that really proves itself, not just all of a sudden or becomes fashionable in the world of guns, but it has to be something that not only makes a statement but proves itself through decades, not years. It's only that kind of reliability, that kind of lapse of time, decades of proven reliability and decades of proving to be better than what was considered best at its time, which makes it king of the hill. That's the kind of thing that says, okay, this is the best gun you could possibly get. As of right now, folks, the best gun you could possibly get for defensive shooting is a Glock pistol. Get one in 9mm, 40, 45 ACP. I like 357 SIG. If you like 45 ACP because you just cannot get over it because of your 1911 sentimental issues, just go with a Glock in 45 ACP. You do have one as well, and it has more capacity. It's more reliable than your 1911, no matter how great your 1911 was. About everything else, guys, it's been 10 years that everyone has been just copying Glock pistols in one way or another. You have XDs, which they have a grip safety that Browning didn't even want himself in the first place to begin with. Anything else that you see, it basically, since its introduction, year 1985-86, that Glocks were introduced, it just became the most prolific handgun there is, and for all the right reasons. It's when you take into account reliability, that's the biggest thing. When you torture test two guns, Glocks always come on top, and they do that time and again. The design is just simple, it just works. Gaston Glock may not be the nicest person there is, and I understand that he's not going to be your best friend, doesn't seem to be that kind of person, but he just nailed it with his design. Sometimes in the world of design, sometimes you just nail it right away. Sometimes you just come up with a design that simply works and it's just perfect. That's what happened in this case. He's no John Moses Browning that did 30 different great guns. He just did one gun that's great, the Glock, and it's, as of right now, the best gun you could possibly have. Of all the shooters I've taken shooting the first time, I didn't take thousands of them, but I did take a good number of them, of different ages, both men and women. They all shot best with a Glock compared to everything else, including 1911s that I took along for testing and trying out. Everyone shoots better with Glock pistols. There's less things to go wrong with it. Accidental discharges, is it less safe? The Glock, is it less safe than the 1911 because it doesn't have an external safety on the side? Accidental discharges occur because someone pulls the trigger on the gun and it goes boom. It happens on 1911s, happens on Glock pistols, happens even on revolvers. Actually happens a lot on revolvers. Many deaths because of negligent or accidental discharges. Really has nothing to do. The Glock design is extremely safe. As long as it's kept in a good holster, it's not going to be going boom unless someone draws it and pulls the trigger on it. Guys, my advice is that, especially for a new shooter, Glock 17 and 9mm, so as to have cheap ammunition for plenty of practice. You're going to be finding all the possible holsters, spare parts, accessories, everything you could possibly want. The Glock is the most prolific gun, and for all the right reasons. For every special operation group that is still using 1911, thinking of the special operations, Marines, the FBI hostage rescue team, LA SWAT. For every one of those, there's 10,000 of other special forces groups or special SWAT teams or tactical teams or individuals. I mean, of individuals that are knowledgeable, experts in their field of shooting and defense. you know, 9 out of 10 are using Glock pistols. Guys, I hope I made the, the decision for you and saving you quite a bit of money and time trying out different stuff that is not going to be working as well as the Glock. Guys, remember to subscribe. Have a great day. See you in our next video. Take care.